Did you know that since release, the wingman has been nerfed 8 times? And it took over 3 years to get to the overall balanced version of the weapon that we have today. So today we're going to go over the journey this polarizing gun has made to become the high skill weapon that we have today. Understanding this weapon might be a good explanation as to why it is so polarizing. The wingman is a single fire weapon with 117 damage per second, which is quite a lot lower than something like the car, which clocks in at 202. But the wingman doesn't really have a recoil to control over range and is perfect for peak fights. It's also extremely versatile with a fast aim down sights movement speed and can be used for incredible high skill clutches, as well as for picking off people hundreds of meters away, all at a cheap cost of 1 bullet for 45 damage, meaning that you'll burn through your own ammo at a much slower rate than any automatic weapons. And if you look at this footage from the preseason back in 2019, it's just a shadow of its former self despite the last round of buffs that we got recently. And funny enough, while some people were concerned with its strength, most of the complaints were dismissed by calling the complainers bad at the game, stupid, saying that you need skill to use it as it is a high risk, high reward gun, which was true then, and I guess it is true now, but to a certain extent, don't all guns require skill to use? Except this one. The Spitfire is just too easy. 2 days after the game was released, on the 6th of February 2019, this poster said, "I honestly wouldn't be mad at you if you ever picked up the wingman. Ever. Let someone else pick it up. You don't need that weapon at all. It's probably the worst weapon in the game. I would never pick it up if I were you. And remember, never pick it up." And clearly this post was highlighting how bad of a weapon it was considered around the time. Obvious sarcasm aside, this version of the wingman dominated the meta, being a must pick with an incredibly high damage per second, a massive magazine with up to 12 bullets per mag, and a forgiving hipfire spread. Headshots also did 2.5 times as much damage, which they only started doing again in the most recent patch when the wingman started using sniper ammo. Mendo Kusai also gave his take on it, saying that if you think the wingman is broken or overpowered, that means that you are a bot. A concerned redditor went in depth as to why they thought the wingman didn't need a nerf, and that it instead was okay, saying that it requires a certain amount of skill to get a kill with it, and how that's a good thing. At the very end, the redditor added that this was an important point in Apex's history and would set the pace for how they were going to approach the game when it came to high skill weapons in the future. And the wingman was still considered a sweat gun, which was ran by so-called tryhard players alongside a Peacekeeper or R99. In its first nerf in the March 6th, 2019 patch, about a month after the game's release, Respawn had recognized its power and decided to do a pretty hefty nerf. They increased the base hipfire spread and decreased the rate at which the hipfire spread decays, as in when it shrinks back down. Its fire rate was also lowered from an insanely high 3.1 to 2.6, and its headshot damage multiplier was lowered from 2.5 to 2.25. And here's the thing, despite seeing such huge nerfs, Respawn did a massive mistake, because the wingman's last change in the patch notes was significantly lowering its chance to spawn. And as someone who was there at the time, this would mean you could lose several points of interest before you'd find one. And this could be fine, but the nerfs to the base weapon stats weren't enough. The wingman was still incredibly strong. And now, because of Respawn adjusting the drop rates, you had a overpowered weapon with a low chance to spawn, meaning that only a handful of teams would find the wingman, and the ones that did had a massive advantage to those who didn't. The community, especially at the higher level and professional community, agreed and were very vocal with the fact. Shroud went as far to argue that the nerf did nothing. So on April 16th, about a month later, Respawn introduced another nerf. Now, the wingman's magazine size was lowered from 6, 8, 9, and 12 to a measly 4 bullets in the stock wingman, 6 in the gray magazine, 8 in the blue magazine, and only 10 in the purple magazine. As much as a nerf was needed, especially since wingman users just spammed the gun thanks to its large forgiving magazine size, leaving the gun with 4 bullets on drop was just too damn little. That wasn't even enough to get a 1 clip if you managed to hit every shot. But despite this, things seemed to cool down for a bit. Players were still picking up the wingman, recognizing that it was pretty weak in the early game, but that it would be usable as soon as you found that extended magazine. And things seemed fine for a while, but in October of the same year, the Skull Piercer was taken out of the game, presumably to lower the randomness of the game. I guess we thought so at the time. This came with the stock weapon headshot multiplier increasing from 2 times to 2.15 by default. This didn't didn't last too long though, and the multiplier was adjusted to 2.1 times a month or so later. And after this long series of nerfs tacked on top of each other, the wingman finally saw a proper buff. Half a year later, in the May 12th patch, skull piercers were brought back and the headshot damage multiplier was again lowered to 2 times instead of 2.1 times. In November 4th, the same year, the wingman also received a new hop-up called a quick draw holster. This hop-up could be equipped on the wingman as well as the RE45 and would increase the weapon's draw speed, holster speed, as well as its handling, meaning how fast you could aim down sights and aim out of sights. After that, in March the following year, its magazine size was increased from 5, 6, 7, 8 to 6, 7, 8, and 9. And on the 3rd of August that same year, it received another buff when the quick draw holster was removed, integrating some of the quick draw holster stats into the base gun by buffing those stats instead. As the community's hate for the wingman continued to soar, it was eventually put in the Replicator for 30 crafting materials, which is weird to consider a nerf, but many people do, because the thing is, replicators add consistency, because you know exactly where you can find it, but at the same time it does lower the overall drop rate to wherever the replicators happen to spawn. And if you want that weapon that you want, you'll have to sacrifice crafting a battery or attachment that you would have otherwise, all at the same time as it renders you unable to go anywhere for the duration of the crafting as you wait for it to finish. This version of the wingman would be considered one of its best versions at the time, in part due to its own stats, but also when combined with the ever-evolving meta. There weren't really any good longer range weapons, and as the wingman took heavy ammo, you could find a lot of ammo on the ground and on enemy death boxes, so practically everywhere. It was very easy to deal a lot of damage for a small ammo cost. One body shot was 45 damage and one headshot was 110 damage. It worked in medium range for playing cover, but it could also give you a lot of versatility over longer ranges, which is why it was considered a near must pick in professional Apex, such as in the Apex Legends Global series, which probably helped speed up Respawn's decision on what came next. And finally, in its latest patch on August 9th this year, the wingman saw a huge change. It was taken back out of the Replicator, now using sniper ammo, and had a skull piercer reintroduced, with headshots getting a damage increase of 10%. This brought the highly controversial weapon up to speed, but many are still arguing for nerfs, as a highly skilled player can still completely destroy a team with it. And in a Reddit Ask Me Anything by senior game designer Eric Kenevis, he stated, "The wingman is incredibly lethal in the right hands, and the sniper ammo changes have allowed it to keep its lethality, but tamp down how easy it can be run," he said. "We are really happy with the ammo economy this season, and the wingman feels like it's in a healthy spot." When one fan asked if the team was pleased with the end result of making changes to the beloved weapon, the developer declared that it was a complete success. And this was echoed with the rest of the community, who deemed the wingman to be in a mostly healthy place, with the odd dissent voices along the way. Despite what was theorized on Reddit all the way back in 2019, Respawn seems to try to keep skill-based weapons in-game, even though it has been proven to be quite a challenge. After finally seeing some positive tweaks, we can hope that Respawn is leaving this heavily changed weapon to rest. But going off its history, there might be more nerfs in the not too distant future.